Good morning. Welcome to my presentation, Audit Your Theme. My name's Andrewozone. I'm a front-end developer from the Chicago suburbs. I've been working with Drupal on and off since 2008. Fun fact about me, if you stop me, I love to talk music. I'm a musician, and the fun fact is my band played at Lollapalooza in Chicago. A lot of fun. I work, but I have a day job. I work for HS2 Solutions. I've been there 8 years. We're a full-service digital agency. We have a great team of over 20 experienced Drupal developers. We're often hiring, so if you're interested, come find me after the presentation. We also have offices, one here in San Francisco, Pittsburgh, 2 in Chicago. And we're growing. It's an exciting time to be at HS2. Today, the agenda, we're going to talk about, first we'll discuss how to analyze your theme. Next, I'll demonstrate some helpful tools for that analysis. And finally, I'll provide some Refactor pro tips. So why did you decide to attend this presentation? Perhaps you fall into one of the following buckets. Your theme has grown over time. It started out maybe in this bucket, and then you added a feature, and then something else, maybe you added an integration, and next thing you know, everything's in this big wheelbarrow. So your theme is just growing, and you want to audit it to see where there's room for improvements. Another bucket you might be in is, hey, this is a great bucket. Your launch is complete. It's a really exciting time. But along the way, as we all know, getting to a launch, there's compromises. And so after a launch, it's fresh. It might be a really good time to run an audit on your theme, because establishing metrics isn't the first priority, right? First priority is to get to launch. Another bucket you might be in is, this isn't a very fun bucket to be in. I don't think she's very fun to be in there, but you're stuck with this theme. You inherit a project, you inherit a theme, and you really want to understand what you're working with. Another bucket is many buckets. You're on a big project. Everybody has their bucket. They're throwing this here. They're throwing this partial here. Oh my gosh, what's going on? So everybody's just throwing their buckets all around. Final bucket you might be in, you might be new to theming or just want a refresher. So you're just in this bucket, just trying to figure out getting re-immersed into Drupal 8 theming. So regardless of what bucket you're in, let's begin to analyze your theme. First thing I like to do is open the theme info YAML file, and that'll tell you what type of theme you have. Is it a sub-theme? Is it a parent theme? As you find out what theme it is, are there updates or fixes available? Maybe this has been established for a while, and there may be some great fixes out there to help you out. Is the theme actively maintained? Might be a good time to size up. Are you going to switch themes? Is now a good time? So let's take a good look at it. The image here you're seeing is for Bardic. Let's take another look at another theme info file from one of my projects. So this one, right away, as soon as I open it up, I changed the name. Rather embarrassing. But you can see that this project was a sub-theme of the Zerb Foundation. It'll tell you libraries and the regions, but another thing that this file told me right away is that it's using a component library. And just even without looking any further, I can see source, patterns, 00 atoms, looks a lot like Pattern Lab. So right away, just by opening up this file, I kind of have a good idea of there's a little bit more complexity, and I may have to go seek and find some other CSS and components. The next file you're going to want to look at as you're auditing is you want to inspect your library's YAML file. So this is a great way to see, are you loading CSS and JS appropriately? Again, are you using a front-end framework? And really what you're trying to investigate is what level of complexity of JavaScript that you have. Are you using React and Vue or Angular? Maybe all of them at once? Who knows? It's the hotness, right? So it'd be a good place to see if it's decoupled or not. You know, again, what you're doing is just auditing, investigating the complexity and trying to uncover it. Another thing that you could find in here is seeing if you're using a CDN. if you're hosting your web fonts, or are they external? So a lot of things, just by looking at this file, it can tell you a lot about what's going on with your theme. Another file is to review your theme, your .theme file. It's a great idea to inspect the hooks that you have. How many template overrides do you have? What are you really stepping into as you assess this project, or what happened while you were sleeping with your other front-end developers? You know. The next file to look at is inspect your breakpoints YAML file. What are your screen sizes? And did you implement responsive images? So are you using the responsive image module? And are you setting up image styles? If not, this would be a great place to take note to see. It could be a really good opportunity to improve your site. So if you're not using it and you don't find one of these, that's the first thing to say, hey, maybe I should start using breakpoints and responsive images. More questions, lots of questions as you step into a project. Does your site use automation? Are you using Gulp, Webpack, Grunt, Yarn? Touched all of these, I'm sure a lot of you have. Good idea to understand what you're working with right from the start. How well documented is the setup as you step into one of these to get Grunt in your packages and make sure everybody's able to hit the ground running and start working on the front end right away. Does your site use SASS or less? I really hope you're using SASS, but if you're using less, great. Does your site use a pattern library? Again, is it internal or is it external? You're just trying to find a field of vision of what complexity you're dealing with. There's a session later this morning at 11:15 called Decoupled Pattern Lab from your D8 theme for the city of San Francisco. So check that out. More questions. How many templates are you working with? Another good thing to understand is how are your templates organized. Kind of tell you how the project was built and assembled. Is there one folder for all the templates, or do you have subdirectories for block and node types? Looking at Bartik, it just has one folder. It's pretty simple. Inspecting the Umami theme, it has a components folder, a content folder, and a layout folder. The components folder contains the blocks, navigation, and search. So what are you stepping into? Classy has multiple folders as well. How many content types? Again, you're exploring the complexity of your site. Are there a million of them? Is there just one that's used with many variations? And the last one is can be a tricky one. Highly suggest looking in the modules and seeing if there's a module that's inserting CSS or JS. Has anybody had a site where you're like, how is this page being styled? Like, what is going on? And it may have been CSS Injector or JS Injector, or now in D8, the Asset Injector. I'm a big fan of those modules, but they're a little controversial because it's a quick fix when you're out in production. How we use it at HS2 is I like having them up and out there, and they're a last resort so we don't have to do another deployment. As long as you, for every rule that you write for CSS or JS Injector to save your bacon in production when there's something wrong, immediately create a card in your next sprint to fix and remove that and add that to your theme. But again, I've seen this abused, and like the theme becomes just being injected in context. So if you're not familiar with that module, it's a great but dangerous, and if used properly, can really save you. You can deploy a quick fix in production.
Can I give a quick question about that? So,
sure.
Is that something like the block class module that will add classes to a block, but it's done in UI? You'd rather have that in your theme rather than in UI?
No. Great question. What this is Asset Injector is, let's say on this page, there's something that's terribly broken with the layout. You can implement a quick CSS fix and give it a path and say, on this page, write an important CSS rule and just fix it. And it can be by URL, it can be site-wide. An example is we had a production deploy and it broke the navigation. And it was a simple thing that just got missed in the QA process. And so I was able to deploy a very quick fix to activate the links in the navigation. But if that stays out there, that's really dangerous because, you know, as somebody's working on the navigation, it's like, how is this working? So does that answer the question about how it is? It's fixing on the page or site-wide, and it's not a part of the theme. It lives as a rule and is injected in the page at the last minute.
Yeah, because we've used the menu, I forget what it's called, menu attributes, which allows you to put classes or IDs on menu items, and then block class, of course, to put your own special classes. Because that's, you're still writing CSS down codes.
Yes. Again, that's just general theming, and that's great.
Cool.
This isn't a module to expose classes so you can theme. This is, oh my God, something happened in production. I need to fix it on this page now.
Gotcha.
And you can do it. Again, some people that don't want to theme and are like, I can't get grunt set up. I'm just going to start writing rules here that apply site-wide, and that is badness. Don't do that. That's how I've seen it abused. And then over time, you go in and you see a bunch of rules, and you're like, what is going on? Like, oh, they're trying to fix this problem. So instead of fixing it in the theme, it's not. So again, our process is every rule that's in there needs to be have a plan to get removed because it's got to be fixed in the theme. Okay, so we've gone through the theme folder and files and have a better understanding of our theme. Let's take a step back and think about overall site auditing. So some questions and other things that you should look at as you're auditing the site is, does your site have analytics? What is your browser support today? Not when you built it maybe 3 years ago. So what are you supporting today? What are the top 20 most requested URLs? That'll tell you what the site is really doing. How much mobile traffic is your site receiving? My guess is, since you built it, it's getting a heck of a lot more. So let's see what kind of mobile traffic we're using, so that way when we make these recommendations based on our audit, we're building it towards our audience. What's in your 404 report? Oops, right? Is there maybe a content type or something that's dead? Just get a good feel for how your site is performing and where some pitfalls may be. Additional questions. This is one of my favorite ones. As I ramp into a project, if I'm in that bucket with that kind of angry looking cat, right? Is the original developer available to answer your questions? You've gone through all these files, you have a good idea of what's going on, but what I highly recommend you do is, if you have an opportunity to talk to him or her, what you do is ask them to navigate the site with specific tasks. Don't lead them. Listen to it. Listen to what they say and do. So after you understand how the site is performing, what kind of site you have, give them those tasks and just watch them, observe, and listen to the stories that they tell you about what happened as they were building it. It's really hard to listen and not lead them and say, what about this over here? You know, after they go through that, definitely review your findings and ask those questions, but it's a great opportunity if the original developer's there and you're able to talk to them. So all this audit, we have all these information, we have a good sense of what we're dealing with now. So this audit ultimately has to lead to action so you can improve your theme. What I'm going to talk about next are some helpful tools that are going to allow you to continue to audit and lead you towards that action. We're going to cover Parker, Analyze CSS, and I'm going to briefly cover Lint. First up is Parker. Parker is a style sheet analysis tool. It runs metrics on your style sheet and it'll report on their complexity. I'm going to go pretty deep into using Parker here in the next few slides. So to get started, you go to GitHub to clone or download. At the end of this, I'll post the presentation and all these links. You guys can get at it. So after you download it to your local folder, you install with npm, and this allows you to measure local CSS files or remote CSS files. And in the end, it just outputs in JSON or in your terminal. But I like outputting in JSON and inspecting it. So let's take a look at Parker's JSON output by running it against a local CSS file from a D8 project I was on. The theme is a sub-theme of the Zurb Foundation theme and utilizes most of the Zurb Foundation front-end framework. All right, this is the JSON output. So what we have done on this project is we've compiled all of our CSS into one style sheet. So again, I'm just pointing at our distributed CSS file. So I just path to it, and it tells me, hey, I have one style sheet in this folder, and it is 192 KB. Depends on the site, depends on how large. That may be a little fat. I am using a framework. So that may be an opportunity to say, am I really utilizing everything in that framework? Because maybe that's a little bit too large for some people. Again, this was implemented, a little context on this project. We had a lot of unknowns, and so we decided to go with a framework to have a lot of different front-end options. Like, we wanted a podium. We didn't want it to grow. We wanted it to be pretty cohesive and have a lot of options. So again, 192, maybe kind of large for some people in this room. Let's talk next about total rules, selectors, total identifiers, total declarations. Wait a second. What are those again in CSS? Does anybody else need a little bit of a refresher? I know I did when I first looked at this. Like, I think I remember rules, selectors, but let's take a step back and just have a quick CSS 101. This is CSS. The whole thing is a rule, okay? This is a selector. This is a declaration with a property and a value. Again, just good to have this top of mind. Parker uses this term identifiers. Identifiers are not IDs, okay? Identifiers are measuring the parts of a selector. So as you see here, one selector, or one identifier. Down here, there are 5 identifiers. So now that we kind of have a good idea of declarations, selectors, and like what rules are, let's take a look at the numbers again. So we see total number of rules, 1,553. Is that good? Is that bad? What do these values really mean? Are they too high? Are they just right? Your mileage is really going to vary based on the theme and based on the site that you have. But this next set of information that Parker distributes to you in the JSON output will really help you provide more insight into what Parker's telling you based on these numbers. So let's take a look at the next set. The next part of the JSON is selectors per rule. So the selectors per rule, you want to be as close to 1 as possible. Lots of selectors per rule suggest that we're applying the exact same declarations or styles to a number of different selectors. If that's the case, then perhaps we could create a single catch-all selector to handle all the cases, making our CSS smaller and abstracting patterns out into more reusable selectors. I know that's a lot to take in, but let's take a look at an opportunity where we can reduce the number of selectors and get this number down to 1. So on the left, you'll see a long list of selectors for these style declarations. So right here, this is a perfect opportunity to write a class. By writing this class on the right side, we have reduced the number of selectors in our CSS. It's just now, as you're creating the form, you just add this CSS class to it, and right there, you've reduced the size of your CSS and the number of selectors. So again, by just seeing that number and understanding it, we're going to try and drive that number closer to 1.
Quick question.
Sure.
Do you have your slides up anywhere?
I'm going to, right after this. It's coming in hot. So I will, right after this, I'll post them up on the Bad Camp page. Thanks. Next, your identifiers per selector should be between 1 and 2. Anything higher than 2 means that we're being too specific with that CSS rule and therefore limiting our ability to reuse the styles. Remember, identifiers are not IDs. It's the measure of the parts of the selector. So the next part of the JSON file is specificity, right? That's really hard to say. Bear with me. But again, just like with CSS, we're getting used to these things that Parker's spitting out at us. I know I personally needed a little bit of a refresher on what is specificity. So let's take a quick refresher, a little detour, and then we'll come back to this number. So you can generally read specificity values as if they were just a number. The higher the number, the more specific that rule is, and the more likely to win the display style. 1,000 clearly wins and is higher over 100. So if we look at this, on that side is most, and that's like inline style attributes. Next most specific is IDs, and then classes, and then elements. Let's take a quick look at some examples. So the markup up top clearly is inline, so it's going to be 1,000. It's going to be a hard rule to overwrite. This is not good. If you're seeing code with this, you got to really ask yourself what happened. What was the reason for this? So that is high specificity. Next up, now we're looking at CSS here. There's one ID in here, one class, and 3 elements, so 113. So a little less specific, but still pretty strong with that ID in there. And finally, just a bunch of elements. It's got a specificity of 7. Just a reminder that by using this, it's not a true base 10 numbering system. So technically you could have 0, 1, 13, and 4. You could have like 13 class selectors. So it's not truly like 1,000 or 100. It's just a good guiding post so you can understand how specific your CSS is. For more details on specificity, there's going to be a link to an excellent CSS tricks article. There's always a CSS tricks article, right? Yes. That's where these came from. Okay. Lastly, there's a universal selector, 0, and important. As I was saying, if you had an inline, important always wins. And it also is part of the cascade. So you could have an important on your first line, an important at the last line. The last line in the cascade of an important is always going to win no matter what you do. Most specific. Okay, enough about specificity. Let's get back to the numbers that Parker's spitting out and really understand what these values mean. So, specificity per selector is 25. Okay, what I said before is that we want to write classes. We want to reduce the number of selectors. We don't really want to be writing styles towards IDs that can't be reused all the time, right? So this number actually should be driven down towards 10, because as we saw as that value, it's 1. Let's just go back quick. So that would be 1 and 0. It means we're writing truly reusable CSS and styles in our theme. So again, 25 feels a little high. There's also an article about a person analyzing Parker, and it's a great article. It kind of goes a little deeper into it. But again, for now, on a cursory level, just understand that specificity per selector should be driven to 10, which means you're writing classes. If the value is over 20, you want to see if you can remove IDs declared in your CSS and get your selectors as flat as possible. Total ID selectors. That really should be 0. IDs are more specific than classes and instantly impossible to reuse because you can only have one ID in the page. If you're reusing IDs in the page, no bueno, right? So IDs get in our way of our pursuit for modular and reusable CSS, because ultimately that's what we were driving towards. There's times, again, you're going to look at this and 79 feels a bit high. Parker's just giving you values. So it allows you to go investigate and say, what are these IDs? Like, what's going on? Maybe there's something, maybe you inherited some CSS that's really needs to style, and it's styling towards IDs, and you just can't control it. And these numbers are trying to lead you to understand complexity and really get a good feel for your theme and what these numbers are telling you. More things Parker tells you. It's really good. Really good. The total number of important keywords. So how many times somebody's written important? 113. This may be due to some resets, but this may also be really scary. So go investigate. You'll get a good feel for maybe that number is 50 just based on what you have going on in your theme. Can you drive that down? Total media queries, this is great. You know, just by running this Parker tool, it tells you how many media queries that are defined all the way throughout your CSS and your theme. When I ran this, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty surprised that we had 37 media queries, and definitely need to go investigate how and why we're setting up as many media queries. To me, that feels pretty excessive, but depends on the interface and what's going on. Another great thing it does is it tells you all the colors that you have. So this, we'll talk a little bit about refactoring later. It's a great way to pick off and maybe write some SASS variables so colors are consistent. By going to the Parker analysis, you may see like 4 different shades of red that are really close that 2 different designers gave you. They really should be the same red. So it allows you to investigate and write code so that way when they say it's green now, you can change that everywhere. Again, a really great tool. So that was just a project that I'd used with Zerb Foundation as the sub-theme. So I decided to, hey, let's run this against Drupal.org. Again, I couldn't, I'll get to a little bit of the pros and cons later, but what I did is the first step is I went to the Drupal.org homepage and I downloaded all the aggregate CSS files and just numbered them 1 through 17 in this case. I know it's a little crazy, but I wanted to see what I had here. I didn't have the opportunity to obviously go to the theme of Drupal and run it, so I just took all of the aggregated files and put it in a local directory. Next up, I just padded that directory from Parker and outputted the results as JSON. So as you can see, total number of style sheets, I said I downloaded 17 of them. It's 204 KB, so again, pretty large. Gives me a good feel for all the rules, selectors, identifiers, and declarations. So what I'm getting at here is I highly suggest running Parker against multiple sites so you start to get a feel for these values and what they're trying to tell you. It's not fair to directly compare the site that I was building to Drupal.org because the goals, you know, are going to be different for the site. But in the end, this tool, my goals and my heart is in the right place. What I'm trying to do is look at all the CSS to identify opportunities for improvements and measure it over time and see how my theme is growing. So picking on Drupal a little bit more here, selectors per rule. Again, you want that to be as close to 1 as possible. Identifiers per selector, between 1 and 2 as we talked about previously. Not doing too bad. Specificity per selector, you know, it's close to 10. Yeesh. I don't know what's going on there. Again, don't really have good insight into what the theme is doing, but that seems a little high compared to the other one, right? The other thing, top selector specificity, 311. So I didn't mention that before in the other report, but it tells you the largest culprit in your CSS. So the most specific culprit. So again, what is this thing doing? Why was it written that way? Is there some crazy nesting going on in CSS? Are people trying to really control the styling of that? Is it you feel like the styling is gonna bleed out? Again, it's just telling you a value. Go investigate. Maybe you'll just always gloss over that because you have no control over it. You know, more, it's just telling you the important keywords. My other site had 37 media queries, as I said. It seemed a little excessive compared to this. This still feels a little high, you know, 20 media queries. But maybe because I picked up all the aggregated files, maybe there's modules that are using breakpoints as well in there in media queries. So again, go investigate, go pick apart what's happening here. But it's pretty interesting, you know, telling you how many media queries you have. And then the colors. But in the end, the Parker output should provide clues and trends for you to act upon. Remember, audit leads towards action. And where I'm leading us is the need to have a baseline and measure your theme over time. So some Parker pros. It's excellent for one compiled CSS file or one directory containing all of your aggregated CSS files. I think it's great measuring just the size of the CSS, so it's a great way to just baseline your theme today and then continue to run it to see how it grows over time as you add more features to your site. It's great to identify all the color values in media queries, like I said, to write SASS variables and really dial in and say, boy, this media query is just 2 pixels off. Can we just make it share the same media query and reduce the amount? Because that's a long statement in your CSS. By just consolidating media queries, you're going to save space in your CSS file for sure. And just find those importance and understand what's going on. Some cons, it doesn't traverse deep folder structures. When I first tried to point directly to my theme, we had a few different folders in the distributed, so maybe somebody else can figure out how to have it traverse deeper into the folder structure, but for now, what I did is it's easy enough to just drag them into one folder and run it at the root of that directory.
Excuse me.
Sure.
I just ran it and I just did an asterisk, slash asterisk, and it got out.
Asterisk. I feel like an asterisk. Dang. Okay. Thank you very much. I will take that out. Not a con. Another thing is it might not be a full picture of the site if you're following D8 recommended approach as you are, like when I took the aggregated files on the home page. You know what I mean? I may be missing something if there was like an intense search area and we're loading libraries in CSS for that. If we're following a true dynamic loading of CSS.js, just pulling aggregated files is not a good way, not a good idea. It also last updated in July of 2016, so it feels a little dated, but at the same time, boy, it's giving me really good insight into it. So I don't know why it's not. Maybe it's perfect. I don't know. But it's a really great tool. But the fact that it wasn't updated since July of 2016 led me to see if there's other tools that are like it out there, and was able to find Analyze CSS. So Analyze CSS, according to their page, checks, so this is the second tool, checks for redundancy and validation errors to keep your CSS simple, test, weigh, and analyze your CSS selectors, reduce complexity, and optimize performance. Sounds the same, right? Because it pretty much is exactly how you set it up before. So to get started, you go to the Analyze CSS GitHub repo, download, install with NPM, and then start pathing to measure your local, or you can also, I believe it's a curl to go to remote CSS files, but again, I always like to just have it local and running. And I also love to have it output JSON. Helps you get a baseline. Let's take a look at the JSON that Analyze CSS provides. So you can see there's similar metrics. For time's sake, I'm not going to go as deep into Analyze CSS as I did in Parker. Again, I really like Parker, but this does seem pretty good. There's a lot of details on each metric in the documentation, on the README, on GitHub. So, but the really good thing, it has this section of offenders. It's very helpful to find issues and analyze in context within your CSS. So you can find right away empty rules, like what happened there? Do they just need to be cleaned and taken out of there? So again, the offenders feature of Analyze CSS is really good. So quickly, the pros, additional metrics compared to Parker. Again, check out their documentation. The offenders list allows you to seek and solve the problems that it's telling you about. And it's updated and maintained, I think, within the past month or two. It's continuing to be supported and added to. I may be an asterisk on the con again, so shame, shame, shame. And then again, not a full picture of the site. We've covered that before. You know, if you're dynamically loading and you're just pulling aggregated files. The next helpful tool I'm going to cover is Lint. So linting is the process of running a program that will analyze code for potential errors. Again, as you're auditing, and if you're inheriting a theme and it's not using Lint, It really, really should. You should be linting your JavaScript and your CSS pre-processing. Definitely install it as part of your automation because it catches mistakes, it saves your bacon, and it makes you write better code. Let me say the last part. It does not help you write better code, it makes you write better code because it does not compile. It just says, I'm not gonna distribute this. You have to go fix this. So linting for sure may be a great way to start improving your theme. So linting for SASS, I've used Gulp SASS Lint or SASS Lint. Again, these links will be in the presentation. JavaScript, Gulp, either one of the Gulp packages there. Cool things Lint can do. I'm just scratching the surface of this, and I could talk deeper about it, but for time's sake, just some cool things that our team has done is you can configure it to never allow important in your CSS, so it'll just fail, which is great and embarrassing if somebody says why they can't compile. No. It also allows you to enforce BEM naming conventions by using BEM Lint. I've not personally used it, but our company has used it and had success. So I'm going to talk about Refactor Pro tips. So again, putting your audit into action. Some things, based on all these numbers, we have a good feel for what's going on. We've got some numbers, we're ready to act upon it. Now might be a good time, because you have a good vibe of what's going on, to approach it as atomic design. Maybe you want to reorganize things in a better SASS, SMACCS structure. Maybe you are ready to implement BEM. So now's a really good time that you've done all this work and lifted up the hood and seen what's going on. Other things the Parker tool can directly help is just start writing variables. You know, it's already spitting out your media queries. Go investigate and then write SASS variables, and then you're consistent across the board. Somebody writes some CSS with a new media query, you say, I'm sorry, you know, we have these established media queries. What are you really trying to do at this breakpoint? That's really critical for what's going on, and most times they'll be able to concede and really keep your media queries consistent. Helps with testing. So you're not playing the squeeze game with your QA people. Fonts, you know, breakpoints, just you have a good vibe of what's going on, start writing variables and get some consistency. JavaScript, you know, again, just pro tips, you know, by writing Lint, now's a really good time to include JavaScript as libraries and only load as you need them. Use Drupal behaviors, and now's just a good time as you're auditing and linting and understanding what's happening to approach it the right way. All of this I'm driving towards, as you can see, using these tools, is to measure your theme over time. This I started exploring this after 3 years of being on a project and had a queasy feeling of how it had grown over time, and the tool started really telling me what was going on and ways that I could improve it. But I think we can take this a step further. I think what I'm proposing and going to start putting into our projects is potentially making a metrics directory within your theme. So as soon as you run this tool, you're going to have a baseline of what's going on because it outputs in JSON. So if you run the baseline today, that's Parker today. So then what you can do is then over time, sprint by sprint, keep running Parker, and then you can diff between the JSON and see what's going on. Maybe after a sprint, the selectors went up like bananas. And then you're able to go into just those partials. You don't have to look at the whole system, but it allows you to start flagging things. Not only just Parker and these values to get a feel for it over time, but why not make this file here called theme metrics and start putting your homepage load time. How many of you have had the call saying, our homepage is slow? And your immediate thing is, it's always been slow. Or, when did that happen? So sprint by sprint, just use Lighthouse, measure it. Other things that you can put into this, I don't really have a structure. Again, these are just ideas for it. But in this metrics folder, you can just put your alley scores. And that way, if they add an embedded YouTube or something that really drives your score down, you can say, oh, that was in this sprint, and that's this, and let's work on this piece of it. Or, hey, we just launched the brand new nav and everybody's excited, but it killed our accessibility. So by starting with these metrics, it kind of takes some of the guessing out, and it can go over time. Yeah?
Did you mention a tool to do the whole page one time?
Lighthouse, yes. And then Axe is a great DQ uses it and gives scores. Lighthouse also gives like accessibility scores too. But again, maybe your top 5 pages, run the load time of your top 5 pages, run accessibility score in your top 5 pages, baseline it today, sprint by sprint. Take a look at that. So when the phone rings and says, boy, we're out, we're not accessible, or we were, but because of content they've added or features they've added, we're no longer, you can track it over time. So the whole point of this is really, my final advice is to establish consistency. Write really good SASS, use BEM, or whatever standards you have, and just be consistent with it, and approach things component-wise. It's going to really help your theme by sharing and making things more componentized. Use Drupal behaviors in ES6. Lint. I prefer to compile into one CSS file. And again, hopefully today by showing you these tools, by just running Parker and the other tool, it's not CSS Analyzer, but by just running those and outputting JSON, immediately you can baseline, immediately you can track over time. Are there any questions? Yes?
Do you really need to compile your CSS with HTTP?
No, you don't. Sorry, my final advice is just things that we probably do. Sorry if that's a little confusing. What I'm trying to say here is just try and be consistent project by project, and so that's what we're doing. So you don't have to compile it just to one to use the tool.
It's not going to improve the fonts if you're on HTTP.
Nope. I don't believe so.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
I have sort of a philosophical question, I guess. So one of the advantages of SASS is nesting, of course. And when you write SASS, you're encouraged to nest. But then nesting increases the complexity of your selector. So how do you balance the urge to nest when it's the urge to nest? It sounds so homey.
The urge to nest.
With what can happen with all that.
I'm totally guilty of a lot of this. That's why, I'm used to making things really specific because I want it to not bleed out. But in the end, what we want to do is write really light CSS. So you just really have to find your balance. So I don't have an advice, solid advice to say this is bad or this is good. It really depends on what you're doing. If this component really provides generic HTML and needs to be controlled in a way, the nesting is really helpful. And then what you'll find over time is that those numbers start feeling right for you and your project and what you're writing. So again, striving to it. I don't know if anybody could ever not have an ID in a Drupal theme, right? I think something somewhere is going to spit and you're going to need to style an ID somewhere, right? So find what works for you and start running these numbers sprint by sprint and see what it's telling you is my advice. And strive to write what makes the most sense. Any other questions? Yes?
Is there a tool that will show you all the CSS you're documenting?
That is a good question. I don't know. This.
Yeah, in developer tools, you can enable a feature like audit.
It's called Audit, yeah. Thank you.
Or does that look at the whole site, or is it just looking at the page?
Do you know if that...
Page by page.
It does page by page.
In DevTools, it's page by page.
The question is about, is there a tool to find dead CSS site-wide? Did you have a question or comment?
Well, I was just going to say, there's a lot of them that work with like particular JavaScript frameworks for like static analysis nowadays. So I assume there's other things that can work with more traditional CSS as well.
Great. Another thing to that is might not be dead CSS, but if there's like content types that are dead, or a part all the way back to the beginning of this when we're getting a feel for our site and templates and content types. If there's something that the site has evolved and not using anymore, like I wrote a big thing for events. They said, oh, we're going to run this events. And it was very complex, a lot of views, and I have a lot of styling in there. They've never used events one day. So maybe it's a good time to just remove that chunk of CSS out, and I'll just save some size there because it's sleeping there. Questions?
Similar to that question, is there any tools that you can see redundant CSS or overlapping CSS?
Overlapping CSS, I believe Analyze CSS had some redundancy metric in there, but I don't know. Parker doesn't say, I didn't see a number that spit out said, hey, this is reused over and over, but I think Analyze CSS does. We're at time, so thanks. I'm happy to talk to anybody else about this and hope you learned something, and start baselining your themes, and we'll see how this grows. Thanks.